This is another video about the ethics of meat eating. Yes, there have been countless numbers of videos about the past few years. The debate has been raging amongst meat eaters and vegans. But what if I told you there might be a middle ground, and not just a compromise, the real coherent philosophical view about the ethics of animal eating? So as I said, when it comes to meat eating, I feel that there are really two camps, or at least in the public sphere. People either argue for full veganism or they argue for meat eating and that all of this is just nonsense. But maybe we can try to go more into the details and really see what can be inferred from the ethical viewpoint. It's quite rare to hear people advocate for vegetarianism, and not just as a compromise, because I do hear some vegans say, oh, you can at least try to be vegetarian, or maybe at least try to have meatless Monday. But it's quite rare to hear someone say that vegetarianism is actually the right ethical viewpoint. And it's not vegan, it's not meat eater, but it's vegetarianism. And this is what I'm going to try to intend in this video, although there are nuances as you will see. So first of all, let's talk about the health concerns. Meat eating in excess is linked to various diseases. On the other hand, if you're vegan, you have to be quite careful about your nutrition. I'm not saying that it's impossible to be vegan and even that it's necessary to take the supplements, but it is quite often linked to some deficiencies and you at least need to be very careful about your diet. So that being said, it's not really what interests me because I feel that it's quite orthogonal to the ethical question, although we will go back to it at the end of the video. But what I mean is that it's not because something is not healthy for you that you shouldn't do it. Or more generally, it's not because something is uncomfortable for you that you shouldn't do it. Technically, you could be entitled to do something morally, even if it's bad for you. So for example, take a bus. Most people would say that you have to leave your seat to elderly person or pregnant persons, but by doing so, you're going to have a less comfortable ride. So you are effectively sacrificing part of your comfort for a morally good action. And this can apply to all of morality. We often have to make sacrifices. So it's not because veganism would be less healthy that necessarily we just shouldn't do it. Maybe it's still the right thing to do. So back to the moral. Let's split this question into two, which is going to be the vegetarian and the veganism. So the vegetarian question is going to be, is it okay, morally okay, to kill animals to eat their food? And the vegan question is going to be, is it morally okay to collect goods from animals, for example, milk, fur, eggs, or silk? And concerning morality, you'll have again two aspects of it. There will be the ecological aspect of it and the ethics of animal concerning the self-interest of the animals. So what I mean is that when you eat meat, it is going to be associated with higher green gas emissions, and this is going to be bad for other human beings. But when you eat meat, you also kill animals, and this is bad for the animals themselves. I do think that these two questions are separate, and you can, for example, be really concerned about climate change, but not about the animal rights. Or you could be concerned about the animal rights and less about the climate change because it's less important for you. So I'm going to try to be quick about climate change. You can watch other videos of people doing it way better than me. But from what I could read, what produces the most green gas emission and use the most land are beef and lamb, butter and cheese, pork, veal. So basically red meat and all the secondary products from dairy industry. Then poultry, eggs, and fish are coming a bit after that, so it's less impactful ecologically speaking, although it's still a bit higher than plant-based alternative. So basically, if you want to only care about the climate change aspect of the morality of eating meat, you would just cut down on the red meat and butter and cheese. So it's interesting enough because it's neither vegetarian nor vegan. It's something of a bit of a mix between the two. And this position is actually rarely taken in the public debate. So I'm wondering if the climate change activists are maybe just trying to mimic the positions taken from animal activists, because we'll see that for the self-interest of the animals, it makes much more sense to have this distinction between vegetarianism and veganism. So onwards to the ethics of animal rights. And I think that this is the main concern for me because it's the most complicated. When we talk just about health, It's simpler because you just have to consider your own individual and you just have to know what's good for you. And I'm not saying it's easy in the way you are going to find the answer very quick in the internet. You may have to spend hours looking for what's the best nutrition, but at least you just have to consider about yourself. Now, if you take climate change, it's going to be a bit more complicated because you do have to integrate your fellow comrades of the human species, and you have to balance between your own self-interest and the interest of other humans. So you'd have to balance the benefits of having a meal with meat with the consequences that might happen on the other end of the world, like having a drought or having a flood. Now, with the animal ethics, it's even more complicated because it's not only just about the human species, it's also about the other living beings, namely the animals. And the stakes are big concerning animals because it is estimated that we kill approximately 50 billion hens per year and 1.5 billion pigs, just to give a few. And when I'm saying this, I'm not even counting the egg production that effectively kill hens. So if we do think that it's bad, it's going to be a real moral catastrophe. So as you probably saw in the title of this video, I'm what I call myself a theoretical vegetarian. So what does theoretical vegetarian mean? Well, for me, theoretical vegetarian means in the best ideal world. So the best ideal world for animals would be a farm where animals are really well treated and they don't suffer and they are executed in a really human way. And basically all of their primary needs are just fulfilled. So in this case, many would be tempted to say, well, what's the harm? We just have animals who live a good life and they are killed in a human way, so nobody's hurt, so really we could just eat them and there's no problem at all. The problem by doing that is you're reducing morality to just suffering, while there is much more to it. To grasp why there is more than just suffering to morality, let's take an example with humans. Let's imagine that you take a human and you would raise him with a really good life. You would give him everything he needs, he would have a fulfilling life, but when he's 20, he would be executed, but executed in a very human way. He would not suffer, maybe he would have anesthesia first, like everything you can possibly get, he will have. In this case, is it still morally acceptable to raise humans and kill them to eat their food? I think that most people would certainly say no, and I would say no. Why? Probably because there is some human sanctity of life, or because this person had so much more to live and we're in effect depriving them of living these beautiful years. So I know that whenever I tell this argument, people want to scream that humans are different from animals, and hence my logic is just flawed because I'm just putting them on an equal level. But notice that this is not what I'm doing. I'm not putting animals in the same level as humans in this argument or even just in my general philosophy. What I'm doing is just trying to prove a philosophical point. One would be tempted to say that all there is to morality is suffering and we just need to reduce suffering. But with this very example, we see that there is something more than suffering because in this case, the human person would not suffer and yet it is wrong what we're doing to them. So now a possible position for you would be to say that actually, for animals, it applies because for animals, all there is to morality is really just suffering. But yet, you would have to prove it. So for example, you would have to come across the two arguments that I gave for human life, namely to say that the animal life doesn't have a sanctity in itself, or that the animal is not deprived of good years to live when we kill him. So now how do we balance the harm done to the animal to what we gain from it from eating a meal with meat? I remind you that we're in the theoretical space where the animal live a perfect life, and really what is to consider is only the taking of its life, not the suffering. So before, I used to take the position that life just was this sacred value and that we couldn't terminate it, no matter if it was human life or an animal life. But then, if I had to take it further, I would also have to consider vegetation, trees, plants, because it's also living beings. And if I'm just putting life as the supreme value, then I'm doing something wrong by eating plants. And I didn't really see why this would matter, because plants eventually don't have a nervous system, so they are not capable of conscious sensations like pain, but also like joy, at least in the traditional way that we're seeing it. So now I prefer to take the second approach, which is to say that by killing animals, we are actually depriving them of their self-interest of having lived a bit longer. So I think that there is no reason to think that animals don't have a self-interest in living longer, because animals like us are a product of natural selection, hence they try to live the longest that they can and reproduce, and they are seeking for pleasures and avoiding pains. So really they want to continue living and continue living a good life. This is what natural selection tells us. So then the question becomes, how much can we take from the animals for our own benefits? And I think the answer cannot be zero, because we still can take some stuff from the animals, as we're doing for humans actually. As humans, we are willing to give away a bit of our life for some pleasure in the rest of our life. For instance, if I would give you a moral dilemma saying you can reduce your lifespan by 5 minutes, and in exchange I would give you right now $1 million, I think that almost everybody would take it. That means that reducing our lifespan is not a supreme value that we cannot trade at all. And actually, on a more practical sense, this is a bit what we're doing with work. I mean, some people work in a passionate job and they don't need it. But for most people, there is at least some times where you work and you don't really want to. You do it to gain a salary, and the salary makes the rest of your life more enjoyable. So now I'm wondering, how much do we take from the animals? And I knew that animals were killed young, but I didn't know by how much. So typically, for example, pigs are killed between 6 months and 1 year, and they could be living in the wild 12 years to 15 years. So that means that we deprive most of the life. It's at least 90% of the life. If we compare this to humans, it would be like if I kill you by the age of 12. For hens, it's even worse. They are killed at less than 2 months and they could have lived for 5 to 10 years. So they are missing 97 to 98% of their whole life. So the potential life that we take from them is actually quite high. So now the question is, do we really get a lot by eating meat? So I certainly don't think so. As we saw, meat is quite bad ecologically speaking, especially red meat. And although it does give good nutrients, it is linked to pretty poor health if we eat it in excess, as I said in the beginning of this video. Furthermore, it seems that you can live a pretty healthy life by being vegetarian. I think I'm an example, and also some athletes are vegetarian or even vegan. So it shows that it's really possible to be in good health while being vegetarian or vegan. So now there are two other main problems about eating meat. I think that the first one is that you're giving up very tasty food, and there are a lot of good meals that I'm not having anymore and I'm missing because they were super good and I used to really like them. Yet this can be overthrown by habits, and you can actually have some very tasty vegetarian meals, but for sure you will miss some part of your meaty treats. The last advantage of meat, and this is actually the most important one for me, is the cultural one. A lot of cultures have been centered around meat. And for example, in my Jewish heritage, on Shabbat, we do eat meat and we have some very iconic dishes that involve meat. And being vegetarian would just be renouncing on all of this. So I really don't want to brush away this argument, and I do think that traditions are very important and we should keep them because this is part of what keeps a society together. And I'm not denying that good meals are part of this culture. So in the end, it's going to be a balance to have between all the benefits for us and the drawbacks of depriving animals from good years to live. For me, the choice is quite clear and I prefer to let the animals have good years, but I can understand if people weight it differently. So on a more practical level, and to finish with a compromise, I do think that maybe we can eat meat only for social and spiritual purposes. So, as I said, I'm Jewish and we eat meat on Shabbat. So, usually when I talk about these subjects to people who maybe eat meat every day, I'm saying maybe you should just keep the meat eating for Shabbat. Because if you only eat meat on Friday night and Saturday noon, it will still be a huge reduction in animal suffering and a good impact on climate change. And at the same time, we will practically keep all of your spiritual and social binding done by this food that you eat. You will be able to preserve all of your traditions and all of your rights because you will still be keeping this meat for the special occasions. And actually, I think it will even enhance the experience because you will make it more special. The meat being this sort of special meal that you will have and you will only keep for high occasions, it will make them even better and more significant. For the people who saw my video about acknowledging what you've always had, it really links to this notion. And also, I must point that the fact of eating meat every day or even several times a week is very recent in history. Talk to your grandparents, great grandparents. They were not eating meat every day when they were young, except if they were super rich. Vast majority of the population was just eating meat on very special occasions, like what I'm recommending. So it's actually just going back to your roots, and it will again preserve the traditions by doing so. So for me, this practical solution is just a win-win-win-win situation, because it's going to be a win for ecology, for your health, for your traditions, and especially the most important for me, for the animal suffering. So for full disclosure, this is not what I'm doing. I'm a full vegetarian and I don't eat meat or fish even during Shabbat. Why am I doing so? It's because I still think that even eating meat on special occasions will still lead to some animal suffering and I really want to minimize it. Also, it helps me to raise awareness when I'm at the table and I'm saying that I'm a vegetarian. There are always a lot of questions and I can talk to my philosophy and maybe people will start questioning their own diets. I also do give importance to coherence in your life. And if you're vegetarian most of the time, but not always, it can be seen a bit as incoherent, both for yourself and for others. At some point, I was not eating meat, but only eating them when I was going in other people's home. But then people who saw me not eat meat in other occasions were wondering what I was doing, because I said I was a vegetarian, but sometimes I would eat meat, and it was really incoherent for them. So out of coherence for myself and for others, I'm never eating meat. So to go even further, and because this is the point that I really didn't touch upon in the video, I would like to be a vegan, but I'm not practically. So first, the reason why I want to be a vegan is because practically, even eggs and milk, for example, are going to cause, first of all, a lot of suffering and even a lot of killing. For example, for eggs, you will have to kill all of the male chicks at birth because they're not profitable economically. So this leads in a lot of killings. And as well for dairy cows, you would still have to kill them at about 25% of what they could have lived because they're not making enough milk. So you're still depriving them of a lot of their life. And I didn't even mention the suffering that is caused in the actual farm and not the theoretical farms that are in my mind. So for all of these reasons, I think it would be better to be vegan. But the reason I'm not is that it's already quite hard socially to be a vegetarian because it's really away from my social group, let's say. And also, I think I would have to do more research on the health to be sure to have a proper diet. I'm convinced that you can be a vegan if you are really giving a lot of thoughts into it, but right now I don't have the sufficient knowledge to be one. So that was a long argumentation, and I hope that you followed it through the end. Please make sure to tell me in the comments whether I had some flaws in the argumentation or some points were not developed enough. And just tell me what you think. If you're just a meat eater, a vegan, a vegetarian, or what other thing that could be, tell me and tell me your reasons. I will love to hear from it. Bye and see you next time.